Hello. Today I'm talking with Alan Gottlieb, the Executive Vice President and founder of the SAF. And today we're going to be discussing the Second Amendment Foundation's 50th anniversary that's just around the corner on August 26th. Alan, welcome. Thank you for taking your time to talk with me today.
It's great to be with you, John. Thank you very much.
So it's very impossible to be able to talk about the SAF without talking about you, Alan. So obviously, I wanted to get it all from the horse's mouth. Um, you were born in California and then you grew up in New York. You said Queens, right?
Yes, Los Angeles to New York City.
Perfect. I mean, that's it. You hit all the high notes in the country. Um,
Well, I'm not sure about that.
Growing up in New York and Queens in the city, essentially, would you say that some of that shaped your vision and your views on civil rights and advocacy and things of that nature, or did that play a role, or did that not play a role?
I can't say it really played that much of a role. What happened was when I was in high school, I started to get engaged a little bit in politics,
Okay.
and then I got influenced a lot by Bill Buckley and Barry Goldwater. And so what happened was it's sort of individual rights, individual freedom, less government intrusion in your life sort of got into my blood. And I got involved in college with a national group called Young Americans for Freedom. And I was on their national board of directors and then came out to the Seattle area to run a 13-state regional office for them. And to be honest about it, they had a thing called the Student Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. And I got them to change the name and make it the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. And it grew bigger than Young Americans for Freedom, and they decided that I should take it and run it and make it independent. And then 2 years later, in 1974, I founded the Second Amendment Foundation because the gun rights movement had no 501c3 educational legal defense fund defending gun rights at that point in time.
Right. So then when you were studying in college, you were at the University of Tennessee, correct?
Yes.
And you studied nuclear engineering. So you studied big arms.
Yeah, I have a degree in nuclear engineering from the University of Tennessee, and I also attended the Institute of Comparative Political and Economic Systems at Georgetown University. And so that gave me my economic and political philosophy background to go along with my big arms background
Okay.
from the University of Tennessee.
Perfect. So one of the things that I want to know, and this is about like what makes Alan tick, what were some of your electives when you were in college?
Political science, it wasn't really, didn't take journalism, but I wrote for the school newspaper and almost
Mhm.
became editor of the University of Tennessee's student paper, the Daily Beacon. And so I was very engaged in politics on campus and journalism. I also, while I was in college, wrote for a bunch of papers all across the state of Tennessee, the Knoxville Journal, the Memphis Commercial Appeal, the Nashville Banner. I was the university correspondent for those newspapers.
Okay, perfect. And then you got nothing in the pottery or basket weaving. We just just
But I didn't get in nuclear engineering. I didn't get very many electives. It's a pretty solid
sure,
math and science type thing. So the
sure.
electives were like more math and science outside the engineering department. It
Perfect.
wasn't. Yeah, it was the great part about the discipline was is that while I don't practice nuclear engineering at this point, obviously, it was a great educational experience in critical thinking and problem solving. Uh, and I think I've carried that over into the gun rights movement.
Sure. Okay, so then you said you graduated in 1971, right? And then you moved on to Washington, and that's when the Citizens Committee was born, and then SAF in 74.
Yeah,
Um,
I did have a stint right after I graduated while I was still in Tennessee. I was on the staff of Congressman John Duncan in the congressional office. So I had congressional experience at the same time, which all played out and helped me a lot, I think, in my growth.
What happened was I was working in Washington, D.C. for another nonprofit. They had staff had decided that they were going to become active, and I was happy to leave my employment in DC, and sublet my apartment, left everything except for some clothes, and said I would come out here for 3 or 4 months, and I would set up the office spaces for the Second Amendment Foundation. So I came out here July 3rd, 1976, to set up SAF's office structure.
Okay, and SAF or SAF, it was about 2 years old at that time. So, and as you said, we're teeing off to get very active. So, what were things like back there in '76?
Well, SAF had the teeny tiniest little office that was possible. When I came, when we started setting up things, we really had the first employees that had existed, because the foundation had been around, but nobody had gotten to it. The Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, which is the 501c4, had been the focus. That's where people have been working, but now it was time to bring SAF alive. So we had little teeny offices, and then we had we probably quadrupled our size in about maybe more than that, in about 2 years, yeah. And then in 1983, we had run out of space with the Citizens Committee and the Second Amendment Foundation, so we moved into our own building.
Okay, perfect. And then your role, I guess, when you came on to get everything kickstarted, just continued on and on. How did that develop? You know, because you're coming in as a task force, and now here we are, many years later. So how did that kind of go down?
I knew how to do everything. Or if Alan thought of something, I'd figure out how to make it happen. And then as time passed, because I've been involved with the foundation for almost 48 years, as time passed, I just got more and more involved in things. One area that particularly fascinated me was the academic and the legal journals. So I was the publisher of the Journal on Firearms and Public Policy. I can't even remember the year it started, but the archives are on saf.org.
One of the things that I thought is really compelling about the story about SAF and you finding it and creating it and going with it was the lack of scholarship. So you had a vision when you were working on moving forward. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, the scholarship element? Around what years did you kind of piece that all together?
I don't need to start with in a long range game plan, but it wasn't just scholarship. I sort of was angling it more in the legal area, but of course we were doing a lot of research and publishing in general on gun rights to begin with. But when we first started, I guess the long range plan or the dream was to one day get a case to the United States Supreme Court. And back then in 1974, you have to realize that there was only really one major gun rights case in the country, and it wasn't in federal court, it was in state court. It was in the state Supreme Court of Oregon, and it didn't even involve a gun, it involved a knife. And the state Supreme Court ruled in favor of an individual, saying that he had a right to have a knife because it was protected by the state constitution, right to keep and bear arms provision. And that was really the only individual right ruling that we really sort of had. And so in the scholarship and research, it was like, how do you come up with building a foundation so you could ever take cases to court and go to the U.S. Supreme Court? You had to have a foundation built. And I realized we had no foundation at all. And so it sort of started with, I think the big turning point was a conference the Second Amendment Foundation held at Boston University in the late 1970s. And we had brought together a bunch of lawyers and legal scholars, some historians as well, to sit and talk about where we needed to go, what kind of scholarship needed to be done, what kind of research needed to be done, and where things needed to be published. And so we set out a plan to get a whole lot of things in print, in law review journals, in academic publications, history publications, even some popular culture magazines and places. And we were pretty successful. Up to that point, virtually every law review article, as an example, had the collective view of the Second Amendment right to keep arms. It wasn't an individual right. And we got that started to change stuff a lot. We reached a sort of a parity where at least half the law review articles are talking about individual rights. And then we held another very important legal scholars conference. We had lots of different conferences, but the two that really stand out, the second one was at the University of Arizona Law School in Tucson. And that one had about 60 scholars at it, not all of which were Second Amendment supporters, because we wanted to have some opponents there to help critique the research and work that we accomplished. And at that one was one of the really important things, aside from the fact that we got the research and writing, publishing that was done, critiqued a bit, so we knew where our weaknesses were, what we had to spend more time on. We had a professor from the University of Florida there, I believe was the dean of the law school, and his expertise was in 14th Amendment incorporation. Because one of the problems that we faced, of course, is that the Second Amendment at that point, not only was it not ruled as an individual right per se, but if we got it at that, it didn't really apply to the states because it wasn't incorporated through the 14th Amendment to the states. And so we came up with this theory and this plan that you really had to file someplace that was against the federal government. And at that point in time, the federal government didn't really have a whole lot of, harsh anti-gun national laws. And so we decided, well, Washington D.C. is a federal enclave. It's not a state. And they have an absolute ban on handguns and on any functional firearm. If you had a rifle or shotgun, you had it broken down, so you couldn't use it for self-defense in your own home. And so that's what pointed everything to Washington, D.C. And of course, that's what led to the scholarship behind the Heller case and the Heller decision in the Supreme Court. And Alan Gura, our attorney, well, it wasn't a SAF case directly.
Right.
Alan Gura, our attorney, was the lead counsel in that case and argued before the Supreme Court. And more importantly, was the foundation filed very important amicus brief at the Supreme Court that was done by Professor Nelson Lund at George Mason University did for us. And we had this concern that I'm rambling a little bit. I apologize.
No, this is perfect.
We had this concern that the Supreme Court might try to duck the Heller case on the grounds that the gun that Heller had didn't reasonably resemble a firearm used by the militia, based off the old Miller decision that a firearm had to reasonably resemble a militia weapon in order to be considered protected by the Second Amendment. And we were concerned about that, and that amicus, we couldn't the Supreme Court, we couldn't get them to overturn anything that was in the Miller decision, but we had to figure a way around it. And that amicus brief was very important because it came up with the concept of, basically of a commonly owned firearm, that was part of the decision in Heller. And that was argued in that amicus brief and picked up by Justice Kennedy at the time on the Supreme Court during the oral arguments. And at that point, we knew we had the fifth vote.
24 years ago, I called Alan Gottlieb up and said, "Hey, you got something for me to do over there?" And he said, "Yeah, come on over." So here I am. And, it's been quite a ride. Alan and I think, make a really good team. We've done, I think, 7 books together, and they've all been on, gun rights and firearms and self-defense, that sort of thing, gun laws. And so today I'm kind of easing toward retirement. Well, in those days, the Second Amendment Foundation was still kind of lingering in the shadows of, say, the National Rifle Association and maybe a couple other of the groups. A lot of people hadn't heard of us, and yet the Second Amendment Foundation and its sister organization, the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms, which we shouldn't forget last year was their 50th. We had been pretty busy at the grassroots level, and we were very involved by then doing the annual gun rights policy conferences, which I think have been to some degree responsible for the bringing together all the bright minds out there in the legal profession and activism together to give us the momentum to get laws passed and to get people in the legal profession to start looking at the Second Amendment as, gee whiz, that really is a constitutional right.
I got it, and then I got involved in the litigation in about 2007. And then I was heavily involved with, obviously not the legal theory, but I was involved in making sure that everything was going right between the attorneys and the clients, and just I called it the Karen feeding of attorneys, because that's really what it was. Making sure everybody was happy, and then if they wanted to rant about plaintiffs or something, I would listen.
At a conference, and that was the day that the decision from the appeals court on Heller came out. And of course, weren't going to, knowing it was going to get to the Supreme Court, in all probability, we weren't going to be explicit about the case itself. But the justice and I talked a lot about, the philosophy of the Second Amendment. And Justice Scalia said, Alan, it takes 5 votes to win a case at the Supreme Court, but it only takes 4 votes to hear it. If we don't have 5 votes to win it, there won't be 4 votes to hear it. So when the Supreme Court took the case, I knew at that point we were in pretty good shape.
Oh, that's some nice inside baseball right there. Looking at that 50-year history, what would you say is SAF's biggest accomplishment?
Wow. There's a number to choose from. I think the one that's probably the most impactful, however, that's easy to point to is certainly McDonald versus City of Chicago, which was the Second Amendment Foundation case. And of course, that's the case that incorporated the holding in Heller against the states, and the reason that we're able to sue all these states and local municipalities for Second Amendment violations.
I'd be remiss in not pointing out the Supreme Court win in McDonald versus City of Chicago. That's obviously something that every organization with the mission of similar to what we do, a Supreme Court win is something that changes the whole playing field. And it was significant in, the promotion of Second Amendment rights in the United States. So I would have to point to that as the biggest win.
If I had to pick like a singular litigation win, I think the obvious choice is McDonald versus City of Chicago, in which SAF was a plaintiff, and that case is absolutely critical. It really laid the underpinning for nearly all of the litigation that we see in the Second Amendment space today, because it allowed us as citizens to sue on behalf of individuals against municipalities and states and localities for violating the Second Amendment.
Alan Gottlieb and I have chatted about this on occasion, and I think the closest estimate that we have come up with is that SAF is responsible for about 80% of the positive case law that has come down on Second Amendment, gun rights issues. It came literally from out of nowhere back in 2010 with McDonald, and just slapped a bunch of people upside the head, really, with a legal brick. I think the gun control crowd wasn't really ready for that one yet. They were hoping maybe they were going to squeak through on that, but the case that was presented by SAF at the time was rock solid. And I think that if you look at how we have performed since then, and using the guidelines that were set down in the McDonald case, which of course incorporated the Second Amendment to the states via the 14th Amendment, that threw the gate open.
All right. So we talked a bit about Heller, and then which wasn't a SAF case per se, but you had involvement, and I think that involvement's important. But McDonald, now that was a SAF case, right?
Yeah, the big Supreme Court of McDonald. What's interesting is that because we knew we were pretty sure, of course, we were going to win Heller. So we pre-set up McDonald ahead of time. And the day we won the Heller decision, that same day we filed the McDonald case, McDonald versus City of Chicago, to help get the Second Amendment incorporated. Now that we had a win saying it was an individual right, we now had to get that right incorporated against the states and cities to be able to overturn state and local gun laws. And so we sued the City of Chicago for their ban on handguns. And of course, we won that, ended up winning that all the way through the Supreme Court. And that incorporated the 14th Amendment so that all the suits you see today, but anybody filing against state, gun bans or anti-gun laws could not have been filed if the McDonald decision was not won. And so basically the Second Amendment Foundation opened up the floodgates for all the litigation that everybody is filing. So we sort of can take credit for every gun rights case that's out there, because if it wasn't for McDonald, these cases couldn't be filed. And so I'm really kind of very, very proud of that, because that's the important thing, is most of the gun laws we fight are on the state and local level. And that really opened the doors wide for us. At the time, it was interesting when McDonald case was being argued, the anti-gun lobby in the country, the gun ban movement, was arguing that if the Supreme Court ruled our way on McDonald, it would open the floodgates for litigation, and clog up the courts and destroy everything, and that they were trying to put in place. And I guess in that area they were correct. So even a broken clock is right twice a day, I guess.
Right.
Because it did open up the floodgates. Like right now alone, I think the Second Amendment Foundation alone has 59 cases in court at one time right now.
Okay, I was going to ask that. I was going to estimate probably around 40, and I can't keep track of what you guys do. It is mind-numbing, and it's incredible the amount of work that is getting done on a national level and whatnot. So that's, you said 59 cases?
I think we're at 59. We're currently
Okay.
working, I think, with 36 attorneys on those 59 cases.
Okay, that's incredible. What a team. And you may have answered this already, or you may have not answered this. So what would you say is the greatest accomplishment to date of SAF? Would you say that's McDonald, or was there something else? What would you pinpoint?
I'd have to say it was the McDonald case at the Supreme Court. Winning McDonald versus Chicago was the most important one. I mean, there's lots of other ones. We won a case in Illinois, knocking out their ban on carrying firearms for self-protection, which forced them to come up with a shall issue concealed carry law, allowing people to get permits to carry, which is really important because it opened up carry. And the threats of lawsuits. A lot of people don't realize this, but I think it's now almost 600 laws around the country have been taken off the books just because of the foundation, Second Amendment Foundation, threatened to file a suit. Because they know we do file the suits and they know that we win them. When you get to a lot of local jurisdictions that aren't that big, and a lot of their budget can end up fighting, to try and keep an anti-gun law on the books. And they just decide it isn't worth it and they fold. And so we've gotten about 600 laws off the books, or almost 600, just by threatening to sue.
But SAF, certainly in the beginning, it was founded in 1974, and in the beginning it invested a lot of time in gathering scholars and lawyers to figure out a strategy of what would be needed to elevate a case to the Supreme Court of the United States. And so I think certainly the support of the academic community and the lawyers and the planning was also a major accomplishment that's not as publicly visible and certainly not as widely talked about, but I think a very important one to at least mention as well. So if that's not the most important, I'd say it's probably the runner-up.
Another thing I didn't talk about is one of our other major accomplishments, which doesn't get a lot of press or notoriety, so to speak, is what we do on an international scene.
And 2007, the Second Amendment Foundation joined an organization called the World Forum for the Future of Shooting Sports. They then shortened their name, thank heavens, to just WFSA. So we started in 2007. The first meeting I went to was in Nuremberg, Germany, at EWA, which is the European international version of the SHOT Show. So we went from there, and then I got to go to Sicily, which was a culture shock. But we started immediately going to the various meetings at the UN. They have a plethora of names. We have the Program of Action. We have the Conference of Parties on the ATT. It's an endless, because we get lumped in with the issue of firearms gets lumped in with just about everything. So I have spoken at the United Nations for the Second Amendment Foundation. I've spoken at the United Nations for WFSA. I was deeply involved in the run-up to the ATT. They would meet for 2 weeks every June in New York. Just too hot and too long. But we would be there. At that point, the United States delegation was very, very, very friendly. So we worked very, very closely with our delegation for the US. And then people from other countries work with our delegations. Our delegation now, I don't want to say it's not friendly, they're pleasant, but we're not on the same page. But the head of the delegation will be retiring at the end of this year. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. And another reason everybody needs to pay attention to the election, because there are so many positions that people don't think about. I mean, like, what does that matter? You know, the head of the US delegation for yada, yada, yada. It matters. It matters. It has consequences. So vote.
And the Second Amendment Foundation is executive committee member of the World Forum on Shooting Sports, and an NGO at the United Nations and at the EU as well. And we get engaged on things on an international level very heavily, because I'd rather fight the battle on somebody else's border before it comes to the United States, because whatever starts in Europe or the United Nations impacts us tremendously. And we also, the Second Amendment Foundation is a founding member of the International Association for the Protection of Civilian Arms Rights, iapcar.org. And we have about, I don't know, it's like 34 members groups in 26 countries or something around the globe that work on gun rights internationally. A lot of people don't get to see that because it doesn't make press here, and a lot of that work is overseas. But the foundation has taken an international role protecting gun rights. We don't feel that gun rights should stop at anybody's border.
Sure. No, and I think that's great that there's work going on internationally as well. And I was familiar with a little bit of that, and I wasn't sure if that was your work as an individual or if that was SAF business, but I think that's important to note that, because we do have some global issues with the gun rights fight.
Well, it affects Americans in lots of ways. If you're a hunter and you want to hunt in another country, transportation of arms and ammunition, it gets regulated pretty heavily. You're taking your gun into another country, even sometimes getting on an airplane for an international flight.
Right.
And then you've got the United Nations on all their arms control stuff, where they want to, ban all kinds of guns and ammunition, and basically create an international registry of everybody who owns a firearm. So it's not just the United States government we have to worry about. We have to worry about, the United Nations and the European Union as well. And, and a lot of totalitarian type countries out there that don't want anybody to own a gun because it might upset their apple cart in staying in control of their countries that don't have free and fair elections.
Yeah, firearms really don't get along well with tyrants. So, uh, you
Say that
and-
again.
well, Mr. Gottlieb, I thank you very much for your time, and I thank you for everything that you do. Your role at the SAF is truly doing the Lord's work, in my opinion. And without you and the organization, there's so many people would be living under the bondage of tyranny in this country. And I agree with you wholeheartedly that McDonald decision really opened up the floodgates to, and it really is liberating people, because even myself, I'm in New Jersey living, behind enemy lines, and we have been slowly getting repatriated with our rights here. And if it wasn't for, yes, there's the Heller case, but McDonald incorporated it. So thank you for everything that you do, and thank you for your time. So
Thank you. If I could just add to that,
yeah, please do.
You raised McDonald again, and I said that's probably our biggest accomplishment. But thanks to McDonald and the suits we've been able to file, now about 80% of the case law that's been won in the courts defending the Second Amendment rights has been won by the Second Amendment Foundation and/or our attorneys. So that dovetails with McDonald. And again, everybody who files different cases couldn't file those cases, one, without McDonald, and two, without citing a lot of the case law the Second Amendment Foundation has made in a lot of other suits.
Oh yeah, no, and your victory rate is off the charts. So, like I said, I can't keep track of everything that you guys are doing. So,
I can't either.
Alan, thank you so much. Unless you have anything else that you'd like to share with us, have a good afternoon.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for highlighting our 50th anniversary. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Alan, and I will be seeing you in San Diego
At our 2024 Gun Rights Policy Conference in September. Yes, I can't wait.
Oh, well, you know what? Real quick, how can people learn about that?
Probably the easiest way is on our website, saf.org. And I think there's a page there, saf.org/GRPC. And if you go to that, you'll get all the information about the Gun Rights Policy Conference.
Perfect. And real quick, how much does it cost if somebody wants to go to the GRPC?
Registration is free. All the materials are free. Meals are free. We pay for it all. It's our way of educating gun rights leaders across the country and people who want to help defend the Second Amendment. It's just one of our budget items. It's a great place to network. It's probably the most important conference of the year for gun rights. And I love people who are watching right now or reading about this story to attend, especially if you've never been to one. It's an amazing event.
Well, Alan, thank you so much, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.